What's up guys, Kevin here to give you a breakdown on the latest fighting game from Arc System Works' Granblue Fantasy Versus, based on the smash hit mobile game. We were lucky enough to get invited to the closed beta over the weekend to put the game through its paces, but first we're going to break down the mechanics of the game and how everything works, and then we'll move on to our overall impressions of the game. Granblue is designed to be an overall simpler fighting game than most to try to attract more non-fighting game players, especially those who play the mobile game, but there is still a lot of depth to be found. The default controls on PS4 are light attack for square, medium attack for triangle, heavy attack for circle, and a unique attack for each character attached to X. R2 is your block button, but you can still block the traditional 2D way by holding back and down back on the control stick or D-pad. Pressing the button to block is extremely effective for blocking cross-ups though. Pressing forward in R2 lets you dash forward a small distance, which can pass through the opponent and cross them up on the other side, which is great to combine with projectiles. But keep in mind that you are vulnerable at the end of the dash, so a smart opponent will be able to punish you harshly if you aren't careful. The dash does go through mid-attacks, but is vulnerable to low attacks and throws. Pressing back in R2 lets you evade an incoming attack by dodging to the side. This evade will work on all attacks except throws, and can even work on certain supers if you time it correctly. L1 is your standard throw that can also be activated by pressing square and X, and L2 is a universal overhead attack that can hit crouching opponents. If you catch your opponent pressing buttons with an overhead and land a counter hit, you can go directly into a full combo. For the 5 characters in the beta, this overhead makes the character airborne, so you cannot be thrown out of an overhead like other games. It remains to be seen if this will be the case for the rest of the cast, however. Moving on to the biggest aspect of Granblue is the special moves, or skills, and supers. Specials in this game can be activated 2 different ways. You can activate them by pressing R1, down in R1, or left and right in R1, similar to Smash Brothers, Rising Thunder, and Blade Strangers. You can also activate specials using the traditional methods of Fireball Forward, Fireball Back, Dragon Punch, etc. The biggest difference between using these 2 methods has to do with the cooldown system. Similar to Rising Thunder, as well as the mobile version of Granblue, specials run on a cooldown timer. Once a special is used, you have to wait until its window under your character's health bar fills back up before you can use it again. Of course, some moves recover faster than others, but if you use the traditional methods of input as opposed to R1, your specials will recover much faster. It is highly recommended to use the traditional input over the simple input, as moves like fireballs can recover almost instantly with traditional inputs, but take a solid 1 or 2 seconds to recover with a simple input. Also, pressing R1 only gives you one version of a special move. Specials can be used with the light, medium, or heavy buttons with traditional input and give you different versions of the move with different speeds, ranges, recoveries, etc., like a typical fighting game. Also, EX versions of specials can also be activated by pressing triangle and circle together instead of R1 or the move's respective button. So while simple input is a good tool for new players, it severely limits your options available, and I would recommend using traditional inputs and foregoing simple inputs entirely. Supers in this game are called Skybound Arts and Super Skybound Arts. Skybound Arts can only be used when your meter is at 100% and can be activated by pressing Fireball Motion in R1 or double Fireball Motion in Circle. Super Skybound Arts can only be used when you have full meter and your health is at 30% or lower. You can tell when your health is below 30% because your health bar will turn blue. Super Skybound Arts can be activated by pressing Fireball Motion in R1 or double Fireball Motion in X. An important thing to note about supers in this game is that once you use one, all of your specials go on a cooldown timer and you will be left unable to use your specials. I was unable to determine if by using the traditional input for supers that your specials recover faster than using the simple input or not, but it stands to reason based on the other mechanics that it would. Supers in this game do massive damage, with most doing upwards of 30 to 35% damage on their own. So, now that you know how the game plays, how well does it play is the question. Well, there are a few things to note. The first is that this game is quite slow, especially compared to other Arc Systems games like Guilty Gear and Dragon Ball FighterZ. Granblue is easily the slowest Arc Systems fighter. One problem that does carry over from Dragon Ball is a lack of combo variety, and it is actually a little worse in Granblue. Combos are very simple. There doesn't appear to be very many links, although there are a few, and most combos boil down to light, medium, heavy, or 3 button presses of one attack, as all normals have 3 hit chains that can be done by pressing the button 3 times into a special move or super. This obviously doesn't leave a lot of room for creativity, and the game seems to be focused much more on knockdowns and setting up mix-ups and media attacks on wake-ups similar to Street Fighter V. Granblue is definitely a slower, much more footsie-oriented mid-range game as opposed to the other Arc Sys titles. Now, as stated before, supers do a lot of damage, and everything else does a lot of damage too. Since you gain meter at an unbelievably fast rate, most games end in 3 combos, as by the time you get that 3rd hit, you have built full bar and go into super. This is even more so the case as EX specials don't burn meter and simply have longer cooldown periods. I personally don't feel this is a good idea from a mechanical standpoint, especially since you gain meter so fast normally. If the meter was shared between EX moves and supers, it would force players to make more decisions on how and when to extend combos, and not just rest on their laurels knowing they can extend for free and still have a full 30% super combo on deck. Especially if you get your opponent into the corner, which seems to be where the only real combo extensions are possible by using EX moves to get wall bounces and the like. Granblue is designed to be easy for beginners to pick up with its simple controls, and while this is the case, players with even a moderate amount of fighting game experience are going to blow newer players out of the water without much effort. This has always been a problem with games that focus on making things simpler for new players, as the simpler part usually is just focused on the controls. But for every game that does this, it typically ends up widening the gap between newer and more experienced players because nothing else is simplified along with the controls, and the concessions made to have simpler controls in the first place end up hurting newer players in the end more than helping. If developers really want to make games easier for newer players, they have to focus less on the controls and more on how the game itself plays. Fighting games are hard, there's no denying that. By trying to make these concessions, they end up hurting the game overall more than helping. Accepting that these games are difficult and helping players learn rather than changing the game for them is always going to be the better tactic. Newer players will be able to do combos easier in Granblue, sure, but everything else is going to be a much harder mountain to climb. Now, one thing everyone can appreciate about the game is how gorgeous it looks. Arc System Works is simply unable to make an ugly game, and I think even if they tried, they'd end up creating some new artistic style that would still end up looking good. The animation is fluid, and the visuals are striking and bold, and the bright color palette of the characters and stages pop off the screen. While the visuals themselves may be striking, the music and sound doesn't hold up as well. Between the slower pace of the game, lack of fast movement, and more of a focus on a grounded footsie-based game, the incredibly boring announcer and bog-standard RPG music makes the game feel extremely unhype. The game isn't very exciting overall, and the fact that you can't do big, huge combos only hurts it even more. This might end up being a very poor spectator game as opposed to something like Tekken 7, which even non-fans can enjoy watching from a purely visual and visceral standpoint. Another issue is the game's online. Arc Systems Works has had the same online mode for about a decade now, and while it is cute to see little chibi versions of the game's characters run around and sit at little arcade cabinets, the novelty is officially worn off. Sitting at a station is very wonky and can often not work for no reason at all, and having multiple lobbies across different sections of a country with a 64-player gap can be very annoying to deal with, as ArcSys has stuck with this system to hide the fact that their netcode isn't really that great. A more traditional lobby with the ability to queue up with the press of a button to initiate spectator mode and wait for your turn would honestly be wonderful for these games, but seeing how ArcSys has stuck with this formula for so long and are seemingly unwilling to improve their netcode, I don't see this happening. This can also hurt the game from a competitive standpoint, as games with super solid netcode like Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite can have online warriors place in top 8 at major events by providing legitimately good practice for players, but this just isn't the case for ArcSys games. Playing online won't really help you get better as a player, especially when you go and play offline. While this is definitely a complaint that doesn't affect a lot of people buying the game just for fun, it is something to consider when talking about the game's competitive future. A strong online mode can carry even a dead game for years within its community. Now we'll briefly go over the 5 characters that were available in the beta: Gran, Catalina, Lancelot, Fairy, and Charlotta. Gran is your standard Ryu archetype. He has a fireball, uppercut, and a forward-moving hurricane kick type move. He has good normals, but not a lot of gimmicks. Catalina, my favorite character, feels very similar to Mitsuru in Persona 4 Arena, with her rapier sword giving her huge range with her normals, along with a fireball, uppercut, and 2 dash forward moves, one of which can combo, and one that travels farther but cannot combo that is good for using at max range to close the distance. Lancelot is definitely the most technical character of the bunch, with a special that allows him to jump in the air and create lots of mix-up opportunities. His range is the shortest out of all the characters, but he makes up for it with his various movement options. Charlotta is a very small character with a great uppercut move and a move similar to Lancelot's in which she can jump in the air and do several automatic follow-ups depending on the button pressed. She can go low, high, or stay in the air and alter her jump trajectory to throw the opponent off. Lastly is Fairy, the bunny girl, who has the longest range normals with her whip, and her specials allow her to set up projectiles on the ground that explode, go into the air for anti-airs, and a command grab with her whip that is great mid-scream. ArcSys has said these characters were picked because they were simpler to play with and would help players ease into the game with the beta. Hopefully though, we will see more characters in the full game that can do different things with lots of different options to prevent the staleness that was felt in the beta. All in all, Granblue is a very solid game that is easy for newcomers to pick up, if not necessarily excel in, but there is depth for more experienced fighting game players to dig through. It remains to be seen how much Granblue will resonate with the fighting game community at large, as while most players will agree the game plays well, it seems to have failed to grab the attention and excitement of other recent fighters like Dragon Ball FighterZ and Samurai Showdown. Granblue Fantasy Versus is planned for a 2019 release. My name is Kevin, this is the Esports Channel, thanks for watching, and GG.